Okay, we're here live now with Mr. Chris Lema joining us. What time is it where you are, Chris? It's probably something in the afternoon sometime, yeah?
Yeah, it's about 4 p.m.
Excellent. So we've been cranking along since about 5 a.m. Sydney time, so it's going well so far. So really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us, Chris. We've got a lot of people online waiting to hear your session, so I'll hand over to you. We'll do a Q&A at the end, so I'll jump back in and ask some of the questions that people have got as the session goes on. So over to you.
Perfect, thank you. So I'm coming to you from the beach in Oceanside, and that's in California, right here on the shores, and I'm hanging out with the folks from Born Creative, and Jennifer and Brian, and so we've spent a week down here, and they say hello, I want to say welcome. If you don't know them, they are at Born Creative, and they're Genesis folks as well. And what I'm going to do is just jump right into the talk. So I'm going to share my slides, and hopefully you will see them. And it looks like they're there so that we can get started. So if we're going to talk about closing, right, and closing is about negotiating, closing is about deals and everything else, then we ought to start with one really simple question. Because this isn't a business conference. This isn't something where we're just sitting here talking about normal practices on deals and negotiation and business development. This is a Genesis camp. So the question is there something about the Genesis framework that allows us to close more deals and to close them faster, to close better deals, to negotiate better, simply because we're using the Genesis framework? And my answer to that is yes. So I want to start by telling you a story. I was sitting at dinner. This was not the first time that I was at dinner. I was sitting at dinner with a friend. Now, this friend was doing a project. He'd been doing this project for National University, a company down here in San Diego, and he'd been building out a solution for the university that was for their students. So all of the students had already been charged a fee with their student enrollment for that year at the university that had told them, when you start school as a freshman, you are going to get a tablet computer. And that tablet computer is going to give you access to a private repository, a private portfolio system on the web. And that tablet will allow you, every single assignment you do at the university, you'll be able to take parts of that assignment and push it to this portfolio. So by the time you graduate the university, you will have a beautiful and massive portfolio of all of the artifacts you've created while you've been a student. It sounded amazing. And on top of that, they had charged students. Already the university was charging them a hefty fee, but they added for this portfolio. And then they went to my buddy and they said, we need you to build the portfolio. Now, they had already charged people this money. I want to be clear, right? And students were all going to start school on the day that they had articulated months before. So the schedule was locked in, the timeline was set up, and they had gone to my buddy who had said, yeah, we'll build you the portfolio. And it was partially in the class. And so he and I were having dinner. We were sitting at this beautiful restaurant overlooking the ocean, and we were talking. And this was not the first time we talked about this project. He'd been working on it for 6 months, and for 6 months I'd asked if he needed any help. And for 6 months he had said he didn't need any help. They were good. Everything was fine. He had a developer that was. And so for 6 months I had kind of checked in over and over until now we were having dinner. He had asked for the dinner. He brought me to a very nice place. And we were less than a week away from when we were supposed to, or when he was supposed to deliver the solution. And with less than a week, after months of working on it with his developers, we sat down at dinner over a very nice meal, and he started to explain how everything had gone horribly wrong, and how his developers had taken off, and how the product hadn't been built, and how the deadline was still there, and now National University was starting to wonder if the product was ever going to become a reality because they hadn't seen anything. And so he looked across the table and he said, I know that you asked me several times if I needed any help. I need to tell you, I need some help. And I said, okay, well, this is, his first question was, what's it going to cost me to get your help? Now, you'll notice, right? I don't have to do a lot of negotiating when someone is sitting in a spot where they realize I'm in a world of hurt and I need you to come in and save the day. If you're the person, if you're already at the restaurant, if you've been the one invited to the nice dinner, you don't have to stress about negotiating power because you have it all. And when someone looks across the table and says, tell me, what's it going to cost me to get you on board and to get you to solve my problem? Well, you're already negotiating from a position of strength. And I said, look, this was a guy that was a friend of mine. I said, look, you don't need to pay me a ton. I just want to make sure you don't get, hurt in this process and with this customer and everything else. And so let's see what we need to do. But I said, I actually think there's a way we could build this out in a couple of days. Now, when you think about building software for a tablet, you're probably thinking iPad, and you're probably thinking a variety of ways to do this, whether you're talking about web-based or you're talking about some toolkits and some approaches that will allow you to use HTML and CSS to actually produce a mobile app. But this was long ago. This was in a time I actually had to build these apps for tablets. This is the first version of tablets. These were Windows computers that had a tablet edition. And Toshiba had come out with the very first tablet, and we were trying to write the first code for the first tablet so that they could deliver it to their students. And I said, okay, here's what I know. I happen to know that there's a code generator that would let us do some of this, that would speed it up. I happen to know that there's another buddy of mine, and the two of us could probably build this out. We might do it in a day or two, but then we might have to redo it several times to get it right. So I probably could help and get it done in a week, but let's see. And at that point, we sat down to start writing code. We did end up getting it done. We ended up being able to deliver it, and everything went well. But I didn't have to worry about negotiating because I was in a particular spot in that dynamic, right? So let's look at that for a second. Why did it work, right? Well, the client was in a rush. Right? There was an impending deadline. We knew for a fact, he did, I did, and the client knew that there was a hard and fast start date, a go live date that had to happen. A lot of time had already been wasted, and they needed a miracle. And I was the one that had the knowledge and access to that miracle. Anytime you're in that position, you're going to close a good deal. You're going to close pretty fast because they've closed themselves, right? The customer's already shown up, and by deciding to talk to you, they've already said, I think you're the person that can solve this problem. And they've already said, I'm in a position where I need you. I need you more than you need me. And if you have the knowledge and the access, well, it puts you in a position of strength. Now let's talk about the Genesis framework for a second. And this isn't specific to Genesis. This is any framework, right? If we're talking about a framework, any reusable libraries, any kind of code generator like the one I used back then, they provide a solution for speeding up development. And whenever you can use a framework, a code generator to speed up development, it does two things at once. The first thing it does is it makes development a commodity. Now I want you to think about that for a second, right? Because that's a scary thing. If there is a framework that lets other people in, if there is a tool set, a set of libraries, or a generator that allows people with less knowledge to catch up to other people with more knowledge, and those people with less knowledge can actually make it, well, it's going to lower the barrier of entry, and that in and of itself is going to drive commoditization in a market. But on top of that, those people may have less cost, which means they may drive the price down, which will further commoditize things. A framework, reusable libraries, or a code generator will naturally commoditize a market. But it also creates an opportunity for you to differentiate on something other than code. And that's why I wanted to talk today. Amidst all these great people talking about tons of great stuff in a community filled with really great folks, I want to talk about what opportunity you have when there is a commoditization in effect, when a framework, the very framework that you use, is actually creating this commoditization. And at the same time, it creates a new opportunity. And it's an opportunity to differentiate. So let's talk for a second from the customer's perspective. From the customer's perspective, right? The customer says, well, here's how I imagine it. And trust me, if you've not spent time with customers digging into their worldview, you really should. Because when you're sitting there talking with a customer, when you're digging in and understanding how they think about the world, you ask them how the web works, you ask them how they think building a site will work, they will draw the first line. They will say, well, there's some planning, and then there's a whole lot of construction, and then there's some testing. And what you may catch from that conversation is that they kind of think that there's never enough planning, and maybe they think there's never enough testing, but boy, do they think the construction takes a long time. And the reason they think it is because they don't understand it. And anytime there is something that people don't understand, it will inflate to the maximum amount of time that's allowed. They will assume that it will take a lot of work. So no shock that they look at it this way. And when they show up to you for their miracle, when they've shown up to say, I spent a lot of time, I spent a lot of money, I couldn't get it done, I still have a fixed deadline, I still have all this pressure, I gotta get it done, and you show up and you're like, oh, well, I can do it with this much planning, this much construction, and this much testing. Oh, that's the miracle. And they look at it that way. They go, I don't know how you do it, but you were able to figure out how to shrink planning, construction, and testing. When I talk about the opportunity to differentiate yourself, what I'm suggesting is not that you shrink the timeline of the work that you can do. Instead, I'm suggesting that that extra space that is not needed for you, right? The amount of time that you will actually spend constructing will be a lot shorter than most people think, simply because you have the framework, and because beyond the framework, there are plugins, tons of plugins that work for Genesis, and beyond that, code snippets and tutorials. The Bill Ericksons of the world have written all sorts of additional tips to help you. I mean, the amount of content out there to help you is insane, such that planning, constructing, and testing can shrink. And what I'm suggesting is that you introduce a larger upfront phase of listening. Now, when I tell you that, your first inclination may be to say, well, wait a second. I thought we're going to talk about closing more deals. And if I'm taking up all this extra space up front, I don't have time for more deals. And so this isn't really, you're not delivering on what you promised. You just told me I'd get more work and I'd get better work and I'd be able to negotiate better, and yet you're just giving me more work to do. And trust me, I don't need more work to do. I get it. I know you're busy. But hear me out for a second. Because most people I talk to in the Genesis community are trying to figure out how to differentiate from other Genesis developers. And the reality is, you're not competing with them, right? You are competing with inexpensive developers who do the same things over and over in an undifferentiated way without paying any attention to the nuances. See, because the customer doesn't understand the nuances. The customer doesn't understand some of the little details that you know, because you've been doing it for a while. But when they look at your price tag and they look at someone else's price tag, and maybe you're saying that website's $5,000 and someone else says that website is $500, both of you are saying basically the same thing. I need to create a home page. I need to create 4 other pages. I need to be able to show your posts. They're looking at this and going, hold on a second. If I'm getting the same stuff for $500 and $5,000, man, I choose $500. That's your competition. You're competing with code generation and automation robots who don't understand all the exceptions. They don't understand all the nuance. And so whether you're talking about inexpensive developers, young developers who are literally doing the same site over and over and over and over, and they don't pay attention to nuance, they don't understand exception, or you're talking about code generators that do the same thing. Either way, that's what's overtaking us. The world that we're living in is filled with undifferentiated competition. And the answer isn't to lower your price. The answer is to differentiate. And the way you differentiate is by listening closer, by looking for the nuance and looking for the exception. When I talk with folks, and this is not specific to Genesis, this is generically when I talk with people, I ask them a question. Of course, I ask it in a way to not make them defensive, but I'll ask you the same question. When a customer or a prospect is on the phone, when you have them on a call, whether you're sitting face-to-face across a coffee table from them, or whether you have them on a Skype call or a Google Hangout, or maybe just a phone call, when you're interacting with a prospect and they're telling you about the site that they need, do you ever start thinking about the solution in your head while they're still talking? Do you ever get to the place where you start thinking, okay, that would be a custom post type, that would be a custom, okay, that's a menu. I could do that with a secondary menu. All right, well, yeah, no, I could do, yeah, I have some of that. Do you ever do that? You ever start thinking about the solution even while they're talking about the problem? I've asked this question hundreds of times in the last 3 years. And every single time, I get two kinds of answers. The first is the honest answer, right? That's where they shake their heads up and down and they go, yeah, I do it all the time. You caught me. And then there are the liars. They say they aren't doing it when in fact you and I both know they do. Either way, every one of us falls into it. We can't really help it, right? It's just a part of how we work. Someone's talking and they're presenting a challenge and we start thinking innately in our head, we're going, do I know how to solve that problem? And because we're asking, do I know how to solve that problem? We start thinking about the solution space. That's a custom post type. That's a widget. Oh, a custom query, but I could pull that together. That's no problem. I even have some sample code for it. When you jump to the solution space, you are missing the opportunity to listen, to really listen. If we're going to talk about differentiating in a marketplace filled with not just Genesis developers, but filled with inexpensive developers, filled with automated systems and artificial intelligence, templated solutions and everything else, if you're competing in that space, the way to win, the way to get better deals, more effective deals, is to sit in that problem space longer. When I talk with people, I call it marinating in the problem space because everybody has done a barbecue at some point and everybody has marinated food. But if you're like me, when I first started barbecuing, you know what I would do? I wouldn't remember to marinate the food. And so I would, like 10 minutes before we turn on the grill, I would grab the chicken, throw it in a bag, throw some sauce in it, Ziploc it, and throw it in the fridge for about 10 minutes. Do you know what happens when you put food into a plastic bag with sauce for 10 minutes right before you put it on the grill? Nothing. Nothing happens. There is no marinating in that. Marinating something takes time. And when we're talking about getting more deals, I'm not talking about quantity alone. I'm talking about the fact that when you marinate, when you sit and listen, when you take extra time to dig into the depths and the nuances of the problem space, you're building better trust and relationship with the customer that will allow you to deliver better value. And when you deliver better value, those customers will talk better about you to others. And you will close more deals because the first time that someone else shows up at the table, it's like when I was sitting at the table with my buddy Garth, who said, what's it gonna cost for me to get you on my project? Now, if you're already in the place where every single time someone approaches you for a project, they start with that opening line, you probably don't need to listen to the rest of this talk. You're probably already set. But if you don't have people showing up saying, look, I know you're expensive, I get that, but what's it gonna cost for me to get you onto my team right now? What's it gonna cost for me to get you into the project I'm working on? Well, you get there because of the references you get from customers where you have marinated in the problem space, where you've gone deep and you've studied and you've learned enough to really add a depth of understanding, which creates a depth of delivery in value with that kind of customer. Let me tell you another story. I had just moved down about 4 years ago down here to San Diego, and I was hanging out with a guy who was a pastor but wasn't working at a church. He'd been a pastor. Now he was just kind of a guy. He was working at a nonprofit. And in the midst of that, he decided, well, you know, I'm licensed to perform weddings. What if I could just be a wedding guy for hire, right? An officiant for hire where I just, if I could figure out how to get the right leads, I could probably do a wedding a month and just add a little supplemental income. So we sat there, we started talking. And as we talked it through, we realized, okay, actually what you need is it's not a lot, right? You just need a 2-3 page website, but let's dig into what's really going on here. Because it turns out the website's a small part of what you really need. We can build a website, that's not hard. We need to have a form on there to capture your lead, that's not hard. But you need a way to make sure that you're bringing people to the site. Now, how are we going to think through that? And we sat there and we spent a couple hours talking through that strategy. And if you heard Troy Dean before talk about, the way to evaluate anything in terms of a market is always on Facebook. I can't agree with him highly enough, right? Because Facebook, for all the things we don't love about Facebook, everybody's on Facebook. And so if there's a way that you can think about how to leverage Facebook, man, go for it. And so that's what we did. We sat down with this wedding officiant and we figured out how to take pictures before the wedding and say, hey, in 30 minutes, Chris and Susie are going to become the Millers, right? And take a picture. More often than not, take a picture of empty chairs, the area set up, but no people in it. Take a picture. It's a teaser, right? And put the link to your site there. And he started doing that. He started putting these anticipatory photos on Facebook saying, in 30 minutes, in 45 minutes, so-and-so and so-and-so are going to be joined to become blah, blah, blah. But the picture, all it had was the setting, right? And then he'd put the link. And so people would naturally click the link to go and check out and see, are there more pictures? And he would put some more pictures of the wedding on the site. And hey, if you need, if you're trying to do this beautiful wedding on the beaches of San Diego, and you have everything set up, you want the wedding there, but you don't even know someone who could do this wedding, well, I'm available for hire. That was 2 years ago. I don't get to see that guy anymore because pretty much every weekend of the year he's booked. He's booked so much that I think we have to, the last time I wanted to connect with my friend Scott, and I said, Scott, when are you free on a Saturday so your family and my family get together? He said, well, it's about 8 months out right now. 8 months out? You have work for the next 8 months? He's like, yeah, your website's awesome, right? It wasn't my website, it was his website. But by digging in and understanding what his business really was about, we didn't do what so many people do, right? We didn't just jump in and say, let's just build a website. Okay, let's build a website. Well, we know what to do. Let's just build a website. So here we go, 5-6 pages. We fill it out. We put a bunch of content that no one reads. We put a form at the end. We publish it, and nothing happens. And yeah, maybe you get paid for that, but the person who's owning the site, who gets no value from the site, that person doesn't refer you. And so in the end, right, it's not very helpful. Now, why was I able to come alongside Scott and help him? Well, it's going to shock you, but he was in a rush. And he had to get something done because he needed to spin up this secondary income. And he'd already tried it twice on his own. And he needed a miracle. And I had the knowledge and the access to deliver that miracle. In this case, it was the Genesis framework and Facebook. I can tell you another story. This looks like an ordinary strip mall, but this was a place where Another friend of mine who moved down here and we got to talking, he was planting a church in that little strip mall. He needed a website too. Not a complicated one, but he had a particular need to start communicating with the people that were checking it out, the people that were coming regularly, and he didn't know how to connect MailChimp to his website in such a way that every time he wrote a post, he could mail the full post out to all the people that had expressed some level of interest. Now, these days, Jetpack has a little feature for that if you're using Jetpack with your WordPress site. But at the time, he didn't have that. And so we built up that solution. But the way we built up the solution was by listening closely to what his real problem was. And his real problem was a newsletter problem. It wasn't a website problem. We just used the website as a vehicle for capturing the newsletters he wanted to write. He wrote them as blog posts, and then we used RSS to do it. But you notice what's happening here. What's happening is by digging in and understanding the real pain, we're solving the real pain. And sometimes the real pain is the website. Sometimes the real pain is something else, and the website is a tool to help you get there. Now, the reality is, my friend here in his little church plant, they moved 2 different times. And each time they moved, I freaked out a little for him, and I thought, hey, are you doing okay? I mean, if you move to a different facility, what happens to all the people that were checking you out? Or maybe the people that hadn't come back, but now might one day go back and they go to the wrong place. He said, oh, no worries, Chris. That stuff you did for me solved that problem. And I'll be honest with you, I had no idea what I'd done for him that would solve that problem. He said, I created a separate little MailChimp list. I created another little blog post type. I created the RSS feed just like you did before. I just went to that category and I looked for the RSS feed and I connected to MailChimp. I did it all on my own based on the stuff you've done already. And so anytime anyone says, hey, let me know if you change any venues, I just write a little post in that category and everything's taken care of. Why did that work? Well, turns out he was in a rush. He was trying to plant a church, and he had his opening Sunday just 3 weeks before we started. He had a deadline of 3 weeks. He'd wasted a lot of time. He had tried it on his own once, and he'd hired someone else to try it, and they had failed too. And now he's sitting there going, I need a miracle. And I had the knowledge and access, the miracle. In that case, it was WordPress and Genesis and MailChimp. Are you catching how this is working, right? When you and your tools come together and you're listening to a customer, you can deliver their miracles. This is what's really going on. And this is the core of the content I wanted to share with you right here, right? This is the core of my model for closing. And I should tell you, in the last 20 years, I've closed tons and tons and tons of deals, but never once have I been in the role of sales. I've been in technology and technology management. I've never, ever been a salesman. And yet, every single time I get involved with a deal that we are going to go close, I'm the guy closing it. And the reason I go close it, right, is because it's easier when you're not wearing the sales guy's hat. I mean, we have great sales guys. We have great business development. But there is an inclination from clients, especially as you go up market, for them to start wondering if the sales guy is pitching them something. So when I come in the door, I walk in as a guy who isn't the sales guy, and they go, okay, we'll listen to you. But here's the model I use, and here's the one I wanted to share with you today when we're talking about closing. On the outside rim is where I start. And you'll notice, or you can imagine, by asking the questions on the right, what I start with is all about my prospect's business. It's all about preparation. Before I walk on to the first meeting or before I have the first phone call, how much have I learned about their business? What do I know? Because trust me, the difference when you talk to someone about their business and you demonstrate that you know something about their business compared to when you talk to someone and you're like, well, tell me a little about what you do. Those are different, right? If I'm walking up to someone, if Mattermark, right? If Danielle from Mattermark, a company that does all sorts of financial analysis in the San Francisco Bay Area, if she says, hey, I'd like to talk to you guys at Crowd Favorite about building a website. If I show up, I'm like, well, I know you do something with finances. Can you tell me what you do and what kind of stuff you need? Oh, she'll tell me, but I've already started in a different place. But if I show up and I go, hey, Danielle, before we get started, I just want to tell you I'm a huge fan. And I read your daily newsletters. I'm constantly impressed by the work that your team does. And then I start naming their team members by name. And I know that you just recently hired this guy. This guy's been fantastic. I love that you just released the iPhone app. And and even not just in the first minutes of the conversation, but over the course of the whole first couple calls, the more I demonstrate that I'm prepared, the more I demonstrate that I have thought about their business before we got on the call, before we stepped into a meeting, the more I demonstrate that I've even thought about some of the possibilities of where it could go. I put myself in a different place. I separate myself, I differentiate myself from everybody else because I've done my homework. And then I listen. I listen to what they're telling me. And as I listen, I ask myself, is there something that I can predict about their future? Is there something that I can figure out that they can't anticipate, but I can deliver to them to help them anticipate the challenges they're going to face? For example, my buddy with his little MailChimp connector. Well, we both know that MailChimp charges not by how many emails go out, but by how many people are on the list. And I started thinking through, well, you know what? If you have a couple of these lists, you may even get duplicates on this list, and then you're going to start getting tons and tons of people, even people that aren't actively engaged in your new church plant. And so what's going to happen is the ratio of people who are actively engaged to the ratio of people who are on your list is going to be disparate, but you're going to be charged for the people who are on your list, not the people actively engaged. You ought to figure out a way to solve the secondary problem without having an impact on the first. And so I said, you know what? Here's the thing. I'm imagining that over time, that list of people on your list is going to get pretty big, and you're going to start paying larger and larger amounts per month. And at some point, it's not going to be worth spending that kind of money for mail that you're not sending out yet. And he said, I was just wondering about that the other day and talking to my wife. That's amazing that okay, tell me what to do. And you see what happens when you're in a situation where you can help predict, where you can anticipate a challenge. You're often the first person that people hire to help them navigate around the challenge. Let me say that again. If you can help a customer anticipate a challenge, you are likely the first person they hire to help them navigate the challenge. More often than not, when you're sitting there running towards, in your head, running towards the solution space, that you're not listening for the nuances, and you can't help predict some of the challenges they're going to face, you're going to miss out on the opportunity. And then, of course, part of the education isn't just anticipatory. Part of the education is why you use the tools you use. I'll tell you a story in a second about working with a very large client where I had to explain to them why we would recommend Genesis over the Divi theme that they were doing work in. And it took a good 40 minutes to explain some of the technical nuances in normal human language so that they could understand why I was telling them you don't want to do what you think you want to do. And then, by the way, here, let me predict some of your future. Now, if you get through the preparation and the education, you're going to get to the close, right? And this is where most people will start telling you, oh, don't sell features, sell benefits. And I'm going to tell you, don't sell benefits, sell destinations. Let me explain what I mean by that. Because the thing is, right, if someone says, I want to sell you this feature, this theme framework is really good with SEO, and someone else says, no, I want to sell a benefit, which is, you know what, if I get good traffic from Google, right, overall traffic on my site is going to go up. That's a nice benefit of being aware and paying attention to SEO. You're like, okay, I get it. So what does it mean to sell the destination? Well, if I start talking to someone and we start talking not about the feature and we don't talk about the traffic from Google in terms of the SEO benefit, but we start talking about where do they want to go as a business? What's going to happen when you generate this kind of revenue? How do you have, if you bring all that traffic, what kind of monetization strategy do you have? And how are we going to test that? How do we know we are there when we've gotten there? That's the destination. And when we start talking about how to accelerate people to their destination, they will hire you. Let me repeat that. When you can help accelerate someone to their destination, they will end up hiring you. So I told you at the beginning, right, that part of the dynamic is you want to get better leads, you want to close faster. Well, obviously, if you're doing this, you will close faster than if you're competing in an undifferentiated space. But we also talked about the fact that you get better leads, because part of what happens is when your customer walks away happy, they go tell 5 other folks, and those folks come with a predisposition to hire you because they've understood that you're the right person, the right tools. That's what this model is built on. Both your ability to close effectively, but also your ability to prepare a market, prepare your potential market by having positive references go out so that when they show up, they say, what's it going to cost for me to get you involved? Last story, I promise. I got on a call with a very large company. You might consider it one of the happiest places on earth. And they had an internal team that had been working on 5 or 10 pages of a website they needed to build, but they had a hard deadline, and they were looking for our company to step in and help them, but they were using Divi. Because the person who was doing some of the work was kind of a designer, and so they were designing pages, and so they were using this theme that allowed them to do some drag and drop. And I got on the call, and this would have been the first business deal we were doing with this particular business unit. This was kind of a big deal. And I got on the call, and much to the chagrin and stress of my partners on the call, I said, well, I just don't think we're a good fit for you. And everybody kind of sucked in their breath and said, wait, what are you talking about? I said, well, you're using Divi, and that's going to create a world of problems for you downstream, particularly around performance. And they said, what do you mean about performance? I said, well, here's the thing. Some of these pages that I'm looking at are really, they look great. They're amazing, except each one of these pages has, I would imagine from just looking at it, 50 to 100 different short codes on the page. And those short codes are what's making this look the way it is, and that's great for you, except that each one of those short codes, when someone comes to the page and loads the page, that page gets processed by WordPress, and WordPress has to go through and pull each of those short codes out, figure out if it's a WordPress short code or a plugin short code. It has to parse it, find it, go look in the code, find where that code is, and then do the work that's related to that short code. And if you're doing that 50 to 100 times per page, and you're doing that for every time someone loads a page, boy, that's going to be a lot of performance challenge. And that's not something we want to get involved in. And they said, but wait a second, hold on. We have to have this site done in the next 2 weeks. It has to be done in 2 weeks. And we've heard you do work with our other business units, and we know that you can probably pull this off. So please, 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 what is there? What is there that we can do? Is there something you can do to help us? If we could keep the same look, but use a different theme framework. We're comfortable with a couple of these others. We said, yeah, Genesis would help you. And yeah, we could recreate this, what you've done here, but we're going to do it with a different framework. And so we were hired, and we did the work, and we delivered it in 2 weeks. And why did it work? Well, you know this story. The client was in a rush. There was an impending deadline. A lot of time had been wasted already. And in this case, their selection of a theme was going to cause them delays and all sorts of problems. And so Genesis was the miracle they were looking for. And we were just the folks to deliver it. That's my story. Hopefully, it's part of your story too. As a group of people who use Genesis, you have the opportunity to come alongside people who are in a rush, people who have wasted time, people who have struggled maybe on their own, and people who are looking for a miracle. And the fact that you have a tool set, the fact that you have a framework and a set of libraries, and you have existing code and even some tailored plugins that allow you to speed up development so that development is not the core of the work of the time spent, allows you to differentiate on something more than code. It allows you to differentiate by listening and marinating in the problem space before you ever get to the solution space. And to that end, I believe you will close more and better deals. My name's Chris Lema. I'm the CTO of a company called Crowd Favorite that does a lot of work with WordPress, particularly in the Fortune 500 enterprise. I blog for non-enterprise players over at chrislema.com, and you can find me on Twitter at @ChrisLema.
Wow. Thank you so much, Chris. The people in the chat room really enjoying the session, which is awesome. And I think certainly in some of those points struck a chord with a lot of people. I know everyone, you could feel the collective nod. We all don't listen enough when taking client meetings. So appreciate that. That's an awesome session. I just want to pick up on one point. You're talking about selling destinations, and I can't remember where it was. I listened to some podcast or another recently about portfolio pages of designers. So agencies, we've all got the pictures up there of all the sites that we've built, the pretty pictures, where the point is what we should be talking about is what we've done for the customer. Exactly what you've touched on today, of what have we done to increase sales, increase MailChimp list, increase something. I think that's a really good takeaway from me, certainly.
So I think words that people need to learn to use are maximize, minimize, eliminate, and introduce. If as a group of people we learn to use terms like I mitigated these risks, or I minimized these risks, or I maximized profit, or I introduced a new product, or I removed this capability or culpability. Part of what happens when we start learning the right terms is we're able to talk about the destination. What happened, right? Where's this guy today? So when I tell you this guy has an 8-month backlog, right? I'm not telling you a benefit of working for me. I'm not telling you a feature of how it works. I'm just telling you where he's living. He's living right now with an 8-month backlog because of the right combination of tools and technologies and the people that came together. And other people who are, potential clients go, I want to be where he is. You go, yes, that's the destination. I'm painting the picture that helps you understand that's where you want to be, right? Well, you say, oh, well, this was a guy who was under the gun. It was 2 weeks left and they needed the website to launch, and there's no way it was going to happen. And then it happened. And you're like, I'm there. I'm at the beginning of that story. I want to be at the end of the story. Yes, you do. And I can help you get there, right? That's a very different dynamic than, okay, let's talk about features or benefits or costs or prices and stuff like that.
No, look, absolutely good. That's excellent. I've got a question here, a couple of questions just coming up. So have you got a couple of moments to just take a couple of these?
Yep.
So Daryl's asking, Daryl Gessner is asking, can you please give me your elevated definition of what a benefit statement is?
Sure. The benefit is the result that someone receives from whatever you're suggesting. So whether you're pitching yourself or a product or paying something, the result is often the benefit. It is a way to shape that so that that's different. You're talking about the result versus what's actually delivered. So often people get confused because they focus on what's delivered, which is the feature. And so some people say, oh no, let's talk about the benefit, which is the result, right? And then I say, well, those are interesting, but you really want to go one step further, which is the new location or the new station in life, the new position that they find themselves in. That's the destination.
Yep. Cool. Okay. A couple of other questions from Emmanuel. Is asking, when's the next WordCamp that you're presenting at?
I don't know. I took 3 months off from travel. So mid-June to mid-September, I'm not traveling at all. And so then I don't know if I've booked anything for the tail end of this year. I think maybe I applied to New York, but I don't know. So at this point, the answer is I don't know when I'm speaking next or if I'm speaking this year. We'll find out, and I'll let people know.
Okay, excellent. And one final one from CJ. He asks, why don't you have a mentorship program, or do you have one already? Question mark.
Hi, CJ. So I do. It's not advertised wildly on purpose. So I take anywhere from 2 to 6 folks that I will mentor over the course of a minimum of 3, often 6 months at any given point in the year. I'm down right now to 1, so I've finished most of them off at this point. But at any given point in the year, it's between 2 and 6. The reason I don't advertise a lot of it is because it is expensive. So if you have not heard of Troy Dean's program, it's a fantastic program and a lot less expensive and a lot of value for the money you're spending there. Mostly I work with people who are already making some money and now are looking to drive it to a very different place.
Excellent. Okay, well, that's the questions. I'll finish with one final thing. The chat room that's been going along, you probably weren't paying attention to it, but you're the one person this morning that has silenced the chat room. Everyone basically shut up and listened, which it's really, really good. So you've got a great skill of being able to keep people's attention. So I really appreciate you coming along and taking your time out of your holiday, Chris, to come along and talk to us. So you can get back to the beach now and enjoy your evening.
Awesome. All right. Well, you guys take care.
Okay, thank you.